If there is one thing that's always going to stick with me out of my 16 years of being educated in both private school and public school, it's definitely going to be the events of the Holocaust. Why will this always stick with me? Because literally in our whole education, we've learned about the Holocaust. I mean, we've read books like Diary of Anne Frank, we've read books like Night by Elie Wiesel, and then in history class, we are constantly reminded of World War II and how we learn this because we don't want to repeat history again. But we've had the Rwanda genocide, the Cambodian genocide, and the Indonesian genocide, and today we have China's genocide against the Uyghurs and other Muslim minorities. Now, according to the Washington Post, experts estimate as many as 3 million people have disappeared into these camps at some point, where more than 1 million Uyghurs, Kazakhs, and other predominantly Muslim minorities have been held over the last 2 years, and in turn, separating nearly 500,000 children from their families. China claims these concentration camps in Xinjiang are vocational training centers, but in reality, a cultural genocide is being carried out. That is not a mass killing of people, but a mass extermination of their ideas and beliefs so that they can replace it with an absolute loyalty to the state. Now, here's a brief, history lesson on the conflict in Xinjiang. From 1933 to 1934, the Uyghurs founded a short-lived independent Islamic republic, and the Soviet-supported communist Uyghur rebels in the Ili Rebellion from 1944 to 1949 against the Republic of China, before the incorporation of Xinjiang into the People's Republic of China in 1949. Though the conflict is traced to 1931, factors such as the massive state-sponsored migration of Han Chinese from the 1950s to the 1970s, government policies promoting Chinese culture unity and punishing certain expression of Uyghur identity, and harsh responses to separatism have contributed to tension between Uyghurs and state police and Han Chinese. It was only in the 1980s Chinese authorities relaxed some of its repressive policies against ethnic minorities and loosened border controls, which allowed Uyghurs to travel back to Mecca for pilgrimage. Meaning from 1949 up to the 1980s, the Uyghurs had been oppressed and been persecuted due to their religion. Uyghurs have been trying to fight for their independence, leading to them launching a series of terrorist attacks in recent years as retaliation. There are only 6 incidents in China from 1990 to 2005 that meet the strictest definition of terrorism, meaning the use of random violence against innocent civilians to cause terror and excluding calculated violence against the state to advance a secessionist movement. 2 examples out of the 6 incidents include February 6, 1992, when Uyghur separatists detonated a bomb on a public bus in Urumqi, and a bomb attack on a hotel in Kashgar on June 17, 1992. Instances of violence by ethnic Uyghurs against security forces, organs, or infrastructure of the state are far more common, but are distinguished by scholars from terrorism aimed against the civilian population. Chinese authorities frequently classify any act of violence or separatist activity in Xinjiang as a manifestation of terrorism, while comparable acts by the ethnic Han Chinese would not be classified in this manner. So yes, Uyghurs and other Muslim minorities have launched a series of terrorist attacks, but this group had been oppressed for nearly 60 years and no one was doing anything about it. So they fought to keep their culture and beliefs, and this has landed them in concentration camps where they're being extremely mistreated and forced to learn the language and traditions of the country's majority Han Chinese. The same group that they complained was being used to strip away their culture in the first place. Now, according to an analysis done by the New York Times, local courts sentenced 230,000 people to prison or other punishments in 2017 and 2018. Xinjiang, home to millions of Uyghurs and other Muslim ethnic minorities, account for less than 2% of the country's population, but about 21% of all arrests in 2017. Now, when I saw this, it was pretty crazy and confusing because it's just like how African Americans in America make up 12 to 13% of the population, but commit nearly half of all crimes. Now, the numbers just don't add up unless there are unjust factors playing into the system. When you have statistics like that where an unfavorable group of people are being arrested more in a country that doesn't accept them, that is a little sus. A story that I found really interesting was done by The Times, talking about a man named Ornbeck Koksebek. I'm 100% sure that I said his name wrong, but it's okay. He was arrested in November 2017 after authorities accused him of being a traitor for seeking dual citizenship to neighboring Kazakhstan, which, if you don't know, is a Muslim-majority country. He says he was forced to learn the Chinese language and fed endless propaganda about the glory of the Communist Party under the leadership of President Xi Jinping. Now, during one interrogation, he says he was thrown into a hole in the ground, doused with cold water, and severely beaten. His torture was so horrific that he says that he eventually attempted suicide. When he eventually escapes to Kazakhstan, he tells The Times, "Whenever we saw a bird or a dog outside, we felt jealous of their freedom. Our fate felt endless." The U.S. has described the Xinjiang camp network as a horrific campaign of repression, and it has been condemned by 22 nations at the UN. However, 37 nations, including many with Muslim majorities, have defended China's record due to the economic and political clout of the world's number 2 economy. For example, Mr. Erdogan, the president of Turkey, who has always promoted Islamic values in his own Muslim country, has been silent on the imprisonment of more than 1 million Turkic Muslims in China's western region of Xinjiang. Even though a decade ago he believed that the Uyghurs there suffered from, simply put, genocide at the hands of the Chinese government. So when you have people talking the talk but not walking the walk, it goes exactly with what Jean Bunnan, a researcher in Uyghur language and culture based in Central Asia, said, saying, quote, "Everybody's afraid that if they take a stand, they're going to be the only one, and then they're going to get hit because they don't expect others to do the same." So this just proves that countries are more interested in the financial risk than the well-being and security of innocent people. According to Forbes, there was a recent report published by the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, also known as ASPI, between 2017 and 2019 that showed that the Chinese government facilitated the transfer of Uyghur Muslims and other ethnic minorities from Xinjiang to factories in various parts of China. According to the reports, there are strong indications that some 80,000 Uyghurs have been forced to work in factories that form part of the supply chains of at least 83 global brands. This includes Abercrombie & Fitch, Nike, Adidas, Amazon, Apple, Calvin Klein, Google, H&M, LL Bean, and many, many more. So, as an example of this that I found really interesting was that in January 2020, around 600 ethnic minority workers from Xinjiang were employed making Nike sneakers. Nike. Almost everyone I know owns a pair of Nike sneakers, which is crazy because these people are being forced to make Nike shoes during the day. And in the evening, they attend a night school where they studied Mandarin, sang the Chinese national anthem, and received vocational training and patriotic education. The report suggests that these companies have been using forced Uyghur labor in their supply chains, and as a result, they could find themselves in a breach of laws which prohibit the importation of goods made with forced labor. These laws include being subjected to intimidation and threats, such as the threat of arbitrary detention and being monitored by security personnel and digital surveillance tools, the abuse working conditions such as political indoctrination, police guards posts in factories, military-style management, and a ban on religious practices. Oh, wow, that is exactly what they're doing. Sorry. And the isolation such as living in segregated dormitories and being transported in dedicated trains. Now, a video surfaced a few weeks ago showing Uyghurs and other minorities wearing blue and yellow uniforms with cleanly shaven heads, their eyes covered, and they were handcuffed, and they're being transported by trains. It's easy to sit here and be like, wow, China is doing all of this bad stuff, but we do play a role in the situation, which means we can play a role in stopping the situation. The businesses should not be flourishing in supply chains due to forced labor. It is time for big brands to stop making profits off the back of the abuse and enslavement of people. We pay a lot of money for their products, so we expect good quality, but we also expect that the products are ethical. It's time for China to put an end to the practice of human rights violations, including the abuse of religious minorities. And it's also time for big brands to stop making a profit off of all of this that's going on. So what is the world doing about this? And more specifically, what is the US doing about this? US officials have said China has made criminal many aspects of religious practice and culture in Xinjiang, including punishment of teaching Muslim texts to children and bans on parents giving their children Uighur names. Now, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has denounced the treatment of the Uyghurs as the stain of the century. And in describing the sites, he said the Chinese activity was reminiscent of the 1930s. And if you don't know what happened in the 1930s, World War II, the Holocaust. But even though Donald Trump has now signed a law calling for sanctions against officials responsible for violation, he reportedly told Xi Jinping that the detention centers were exactly the right thing to do. Mr. Trump has largely ignored the issue, essentially giving China a pass. And if the United States, which has the #1 economy, does not take leadership role into this issue, other countries do not feel pressured to act either. As seen in World War II, allies didn't start winning until the US joined the fight. Daniel R. Russell, the Obama administration's Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs, said it perfectly when he said, many governments are looking the other way and self-censoring on the issue of Xinjiang. Beijing is notoriously prickly about its self-declared core interests, and few countries are willing to put their economic benefits of good relations with China at risk, let alone find themselves on the receiving end of China's retaliation. And even at the United Nations in New York, China was working the angles. At one Secretary Council meeting last year that was set to discuss human rights violations in Syria, China intervened. Why? Why did they do that? Simply because they were concerned the discussion would veer into the one in Xinjiang. It's like when you did something wrong in the past, I don't know, like what? Told your grandmother that you would send her to a retirement home, okay? So from now on, whenever we pass a retirement home or retirement is advertised on the TV, you can bet a compliment will be thrown, the subject will be changed to deflect my controversial actions. So to recap everything I just said, the world has been noticeably quiet about what's happening in Xinjiang, where China has built an extensive network of detention camps over the past 2 years in a state-led operation to convert Uyghurs and other Muslim minorities into loyal secular supporters of the Communist Party. Now, I understand that there are so many things going on in this world right now. There's a femicide happening in Turkey, humanitarian crises in Yemen and Syria and many other countries, coronavirus cases skyrocketing in the United States, but collectively, after World War II, we married ourselves to the idea that we would not let history repeat itself. We would put it in our lesson plans, we would put it in our teachings to the younger generation, but as the problem is happening right in front of our faces, we ignore it for our own selfish pleasures. Now, selfishness is the death of progression in this world. If people would just stop caring about themselves for 2 seconds and listen to someone else's story or try to help someone out, this world could be fixed for better, not worse. Things like humanitarian crises, climate change, femicides, pandemics, all of these things could end if people would just come together and fix them. It really is easier said than done in this case, but people don't want to do that. Well, I definitely hope you enjoyed everything I said today, especially on this topic because it's going all over social media and on the news, and I hope I gave you another insight on what's going on and educated you further. There are 2 petitions in my description below. Please take the time to sign them. It's important that though we might not be billionaires and we can donate all the money in the world, we can still sign petitions that actually bring change. So thank you for listening to this podcast, and I hope everyone has a great day.